June 4, 1942, 10:22 a.m., 180 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood on the bridge of the carrier Akagi, Japan's most powerful warship, watching his crews frantically rearm aircraft for the third time that morning. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from rage at the impossible situation developing around him. Through the bridge windows, he could see the organized chaos, ordnance crews wheeling bombs across the hangar deck, pilots running toward their aircraft, black smoke rising from the destroyer Nawaki after an American dive bomber attack minutes earlier. Another American carrier group has been spotted, his air operations officer reported, his voice carefully controlled despite the implications. Bearing 010, distance approximately 200 miles, estimated 2 carriers with full air groups. Nagumo's response would be recorded in multiple officers' diaries. Impossible. American carriers are either at Pearl Harbor or scattered across the Pacific. Our intelligence confirmed only 1, maybe 2 carriers in this entire sector. They cannot possibly have concentrated such force without our knowledge. What Nagumo didn't know, what none of the 21 experienced officers crowded into Akagi's flag bridge could have imagined, was that one of those American carriers, a ship they believed they had sunk 6 months earlier at the Battle of Santa Cruz, would launch aircraft in exactly 47 minutes that would destroy 4 Japanese fleet carriers and kill 3,057 of the Imperial Navy's most experienced air crews. The USS Enterprise, CV-6, a ship Japanese intelligence had reported sunk no fewer than 3 times, damaged beyond repair twice, and withdrawn from combat 4 times, was about to demonstrate that American industrial capacity and tactical adaptability could overcome Japan's numerical superiority and pilot experience. Within 6 hours, the balance of naval power in the Pacific would shift irrevocably. Within 6 minutes of Enterprise's dive bombers reaching their targets, 3 Japanese carriers would be burning wrecks. The 4th would follow before sunset. And Nagumo, standing in his flag bridge, convinced of American weakness, would watch his entire striking force, the spearhead that had crushed Pearl Harbor, terrorized the Indian Ocean, and dominated the Pacific for 6 months, burn and sink beneath waves that would soon belong to America. The mathematics of carrier warfare were about to be rewritten. 4 Japanese carriers with 248 aircraft would face 3 American carriers with 233 aircraft. Japan had better planes, more experienced pilots, and tactical surprise. America had radar, better damage control, unbreakable codes, and 1 ship that refused to die. USS Enterprise, the carrier that would earn more battle stars than any other U.S. warship in World War II, survive kamikaze hits, bombs, torpedoes, and emerge from the war as the most decorated ship in American naval history. But that morning, as Nagumo dismissed the sighting report and ordered his crews to prepare for an attack on Midway's shore installations, none of the Japanese officers understood what was rising from the southern horizon. Enterprise wasn't just a carrier. She was a statement. American carriers didn't die. They got angrier.
In 1934, when USS Enterprise's keel was laid at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, Japanese naval architects studied the plans with a mixture of amusement and contempt. The treaty that emerged from the Washington Naval Conference of 1922 had limited carrier construction, and every navy faced the same question: build a few massive carriers or many smaller ones? Japan chose concentration. Carriers like Akagi and Kaga displaced over 40,000 tons, carried enormous air groups, and embodied the samurai principle of decisive battle through overwhelming force at the critical point. America chose a middle path that looked like compromise born of weakness. The Yorktown-class carriers, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet, displaced just 19,800 tons, roughly half the size of Japan's largest carriers. They carried approximately 90 aircraft compared to the 100-plus aircraft on Japanese fleet carriers. They were, in the assessment of Commander Minoru Genda, Japan's premier carrier tactician, adequate for commerce protection but unsuitable for decisive fleet action. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong, but in 1934 it seemed reasonable. What Genda and other Japanese planners failed to understand was that the Yorktown-class carriers embodied a completely different philosophy of carrier warfare, one that would prove superior in every major engagement of the Pacific War. Captain Charles Pownall, Enterprise's first commanding officer who took command when she was commissioned on May 12, 1938, understood what the designers at Bureau of Ships had created. In a letter to Admiral William Halsey, who would later command Enterprise in combat, Pownall wrote, "The Japanese build their carriers to win battles. We have built ours to win wars. Enterprise can take damage that would sink their ships, operate her air group with half her elevators destroyed, make 32 knots on one propeller shaft, and fight fires that would consume their wooden-decked carriers. She is not the most powerful carrier afloat. She may be the most survivable." The key innovations weren't visible in intelligence photographs. Damage control beyond comprehension. Enterprise featured compartmentalized design with 1,200 watertight compartments compared to the 400 to 600 in Japanese carriers. Her fire suppression system could pump 9,000 gallons of seawater through 427 spray nozzles. Her hangar deck was enclosed with steel, not open wood like Japanese carriers. Every major system had redundant backups, 2 separate electrical grids, 3 independent steam systems, 4 diesel generators for emergency power. Japanese carriers, designed for speed and striking power, featured open hangar decks that improved aircraft operations but turned into blast furnaces when bombs penetrated. Their damage control parties numbered 30 to 40 men. Enterprise carried 150 trained damage control specialists, plus another 300 sailors trained in emergency procedures. Operational endurance. Enterprise could maintain 25 knots for 12,500 nautical miles, enough to cross the Pacific twice without refueling. Her food stores could feed her 2,200-man crew for 90 days. Her magazines held 310,000 gallons of aviation gasoline in protected tanks with CO2 flooding systems, plus 650 tons of bombs and torpedoes. Japanese carriers, designed for operations in the Western Pacific with land-based support, typically carried fuel for 8,000 to 10,000 miles and provisions for 30 to 45 days. Their smaller crews meant less redundancy. When specialists died, capabilities died with them. The air group that evolved. On December 7, 1941, Enterprise operated 83 aircraft, 27 F-4F Wildcat fighters, 37 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and 19 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. This composition reflected American tactical doctrine, balanced striking power with fighters primarily for defense. Japanese carriers operated 100-plus aircraft, with lighter weight allowing more planes per ton of displacement. But their air groups were unbalanced. 25 to 30% fighters, 70 to 75% strike aircraft. This ratio worked perfectly for Pearl Harbor-style surprise attacks. It would prove fatal when enemy fighters intercepted their strikes. By Midway, Enterprise's air group had evolved: 27 Wildcats, 36 Dauntlesses, 14 Devastators. More fighters, better balance, lessons from Coral Sea integrated. The Japanese air groups at Midway remained structured for the decisive battle that never came, the one where they would strike first, hit hard, and face minimal opposition.
Throughout 1941 and early 1942, Japanese naval intelligence built a picture of American carrier capabilities that seemed comprehensive and reasonable. It was systematically wrong in every important particular.
Assessment of American Carriers, Japanese Naval Intelligence, December 1941. USS Enterprise, CV-6. Yorktown-class fleet carrier. Moderate combat capability. Suitable for operations against commerce raiders and light forces. Inferior to Kaga or Akagi in striking power, armor protection, and air group experience. Vulnerable to concentrated air attack. Estimated combat survivability low. This assessment came from Admiral Irasuku Yamamoto's intelligence staff and was based on tonnage comparisons, Enterprise, 19,800 tons, versus Akagi, 42,000 tons. Aircraft capacity, Enterprise, about 90 versus Akagi, 100. Speed assessments, both approximately 32 knots, and observed operational patterns. Enterprise often operated alone, suggesting limited capability. What Japanese intelligence missed: 1. The radar advantage. Enterprise was fitted with CXAM-1 air search radar in 1941, giving her the ability to detect incoming aircraft at 100+ miles. Japanese carriers had no radar. Their early warning depended entirely on eyesight, approximately 12 miles for aircraft detection on a clear day. This meant Enterprise could vector fighters to intercept incoming strikes 88 miles sooner than Japanese carriers could respond. In carrier warfare, where minutes determined survival, this was decisive. The damage control philosophy. Japanese intelligence assessed armor and structural strength, but didn't understand that American damage control doctrine was fundamentally different. Japanese carriers were designed to avoid damage. American carriers were designed to absorb it and keep fighting. When fire broke out on a Japanese carrier, doctrine called for immediate aviation fuel drainage, magazine flooding, and preparation to abandon ship if fire spread. When fire broke out on an American carrier, 150 specialized damage control personnel swarmed the blaze with fog nozzles, CO2 systems, and firefighting training that bordered on obsessive. The pilot quality gap narrowing. Japanese intelligence correctly assessed that their pilots were superior in 1941. The average Japanese carrier pilot had 800 hours flight time and extensive combat experience over China. The average American carrier pilot had 300 hours and no combat experience. But this gap was closing rapidly. American training was producing 1,000 new naval aviators every month. Japanese training produced 300. The mathematics were inexorable. Japan's pilot advantage was a depleting resource. America's was expanding. Perhaps most critically, Japanese intelligence understood that America could build more carriers, but didn't grasp the implications. Spy networks reported on the Essex-class carrier construction program, 23 carriers planned. What intelligence failed to communicate to Japanese leadership was the timeline. These carriers would begin entering service in 1943, and thereafter America would commission one new fleet carrier approximately every 2 to 3 months, while simultaneously building dozens of escort carriers. The Battle of Midway would be fought before this disparity became obvious, but the seeds of inevitable defeat were already planted in American shipyards.
By June 1942, Japanese intelligence had sunk USS Enterprise 3 times. Sinking number 1, February 1, 1942. Japanese submarines reported attacking and damaging an American carrier south of Oahu. Intelligence assessed this as probably Enterprise, severe damage undertow to Pearl Harbor. Reality, Enterprise was 600 miles away conducting airstrikes on Kwajalein. The submarine had attacked and missed destroyer USS Balch. Sinking number 2, April 18, 1942. After the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, Japanese patrol aircraft reported attacking the American carrier force that launched the raid, claiming hits on one carrier that was smoking and listing. Reality, no Japanese aircraft found the carrier force. Enterprise and Hornet withdrew without contact. The smoking carrier was a merchant ship, burning after a submarine attack, unrelated to the raid. Sinking number 3, May 8, 1942.
This one was closest to truth. At the Battle of Coral Sea, Japanese aircraft attacked and severely damaged USS Yorktown, CV-5, Enterprise's sister ship. Intelligence correctly identified the carrier and assessed damage as fatal. Vessel will not survive transit to port. Reality, Yorktown did limp back to Pearl Harbor, listing and burning. But what happened next exemplified the industrial and organizational advantages Japan faced. A carrier damaged on May 8th, fighting again on June 4th. It violated every assumption about naval engineering and logistics timelines. Admiral Nagumo, planning the Midway operation, received intelligence briefings that stated American carrier strength in Pacific, Enterprise, CV-6, possibly operational but low readiness, Hornet, CV-8, probable, Yorktown, CV-5, damaged severely at Coral Sea, minimum 90 days repair. Assessment, maximum 2 carriers, possibly only 1 can oppose Midway operation. The actual American force, 3 carriers with full air groups repaired, supplied, and positioned perfectly for ambush based on broken Japanese codes that revealed every detail of the planned attack.
The true advantage Enterprise possessed wasn't visible to Japanese intelligence because it was doctrinal, not technical. American carrier doctrine had evolved through 1930s war games and fleet problem exercises into something fundamentally different from Japanese practice. Japanese carrier doctrine, the decisive battle. Japanese planning assumed a single climactic engagement where massed carrier strikes would cripple the enemy fleet, followed by battleship action to finish the survivors. Their doctrine emphasized concentration, mass carriers together for overwhelming alpha strike. Surprise, hit first, hit hard, destroy enemy before they can respond. Offensive focus, minimal fighters retained for defense, most sent on strikes. And rigid command, centralized control, detailed operational planning, limited initiative for subordinate commanders. This doctrine had worked perfectly at Pearl Harbor. Surprise attack, overwhelming force, catastrophic damage before America could respond. American carrier doctrine, distributed lethality. American planning, refined through 2 decades of competitive fleet problem exercises, emphasized flexibility. Carriers operate independently or in small groups, denying enemy single target. Defense in depth, layered fighter cover, radar direction, and massed anti-aircraft fire. Decentralized execution, squadron commanders given objectives and latitude in achieving them. And damage tolerance, expect to take hits, prioritize survival and continued operations. Captain George Murray, Enterprise's commanding officer at Midway, embodied this doctrine. His operations order for June 4, 1942, discovered in Naval Historical Center archives, stated, Air Group will attack enemy carriers when located. Fighter direction will be flexible based on threat development. Strikes will continue until all enemy carriers are destroyed or until Enterprise is no longer operational. If Enterprise is disabled, aircraft will recover on Hornet or Yorktown if operational, or ditch near friendly vessels. There is no option for withdrawal. We will continue attacking until enemy or ourselves are destroyed. This was not samurai theatrics. This was mathematical calculation. 3 American carriers with 200 aircraft faced 4 Japanese carriers with 240 aircraft. The Japanese had better planes and more experienced pilots, but the Americans had radar for fighter direction, better damage control for survival, and a doctrine that emphasized killing enemy carriers over all other objectives. Murray's order continued, quote, "Do not attack battleships, do not attack cruisers, do not attack destroyers unless they are only targets available. Find enemy carriers, sink enemy carriers. Nothing else matters," end quote. Japanese doctrine spread strikes across the enemy fleet. seeking to cripple multiple ships. American doctrine concentrated everything on enemy carriers, because carrier warfare doctrine held an asymmetric truth. A damaged carrier could not launch or recover aircraft effectively. A damaged battleship could still shoot. Therefore, kill carriers first, kill carriers only, kill carriers exclusively. This would prove decisive at Midway.
The morning of June 4, 1942. The fog of war. At 0430, USS Enterprise turned into the wind 200 miles northeast of Midway Atoll, her flight deck crew already positioned for the first launch of what everyone aboard knew would be the most important day of the Pacific War. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, Enterprise's Air Group commander, stood in flight deck control reviewing the strike composition. 10 F-4F Wildcat fighters for combat air patrol over the task force. 17 F-4F Wildcats to escort the strike. 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers armed with 1,000-pound bombs. 14 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers with Mark 13 torpedoes. McCluskey knew the numbers weren't favorable. Japanese carriers probably had 240-plus aircraft. American three-carrier force had approximately 233. The Japanese pilots had more experience. Their Zero fighters were superior to Wildcats in speed, climb, and maneuverability. Their dive bombers had longer range. And if the Americans struck first, the Japanese would almost certainly strike back with whatever they had remaining, and Enterprise would be the most valuable target. But McCluskey also knew what Japanese commanders didn't: exact location of the Japanese carrier force, their course, their speed, and their operational plan. Navy codebreakers had read Japan's mail. Admiral Nimitz knew the Japanese would attack Midway at dawn, knew they would approach from the northwest, knew their carriers would be approximately 200 miles from the atoll at first light. The Japanese knew Americans might be nearby. Americans knew exactly where Japanese carriers were. At 0534, reconnaissance aircraft from Midway spotted the Japanese carriers and radioed. Many planes heading Midway, bearing 320, distance 150. On Enterprise's flag bridge, Admiral Raymond Spruance studied the contact report. His carrier task force, Enterprise and Hornet, was positioned perfectly to catch the Japanese carriers immediately after they launched their strike against Midway. The Japanese would be vulnerable, their decks full of aircraft being rearmed and refueled. Spruance turned to Captain Miles Browning, his chief of staff. Launch the attack. Everything. Full deck load strike. This decision would be debated by historians for decades. Conventional carrier doctrine recommended waiting until the range closed to 100 miles, maximizing aircraft fuel reserves and strike coordination. Spruance was launching from 175 miles, near maximum range for his torpedo bombers, requiring his dive bombers to fly at the edge of their fuel capacity. But Spruance understood the mathematics of mutual vulnerability. If he waited for ideal range, Japanese scouts might spot his carriers. If Japanese scouts spotted Enterprise and Hornet, the Japanese would launch their own strike at approximately the same moment Spruance launched his. Both strikes would cross in midair. Both carrier forces would be vulnerable, and the outcome would depend on which strike was more effective and which carriers had better damage control. By launching immediately from maximum range, Spruance sacrificed ideal coordination for tactical surprise. His aircraft would arrive while Japanese carriers were most vulnerable, decks full of aircraft being rearmed, combat air patrol depleted by Midway interception, and attention focused on recovery operations rather than defensive positioning. At 0700 hours, Enterprise launched her strike. 33 dive bombers, 14 torpedo bombers, 10 escorting fighters. The aircraft formed up slowly in the humid dawn air, precious minutes and fuel consumed as squadrons coordinated. McCleskey orbited at 20,000 feet, watching his strike group assemble below. Then, disaster. The torpedo bombers, flying at 1,500 feet to stay beneath cloud cover, lost sight of the dive bombers at 20,000 feet. Enterprise's strike split into two separate groups, coordination shattered, mutual support impossible. McCleskey faced a decision. Descend to rejoin the torpedo bombers, sacrificing altitude advantage and burning additional fuel, or maintain altitude and hope the split groups could still coordinate once over the target. He chose to maintain altitude. The torpedo bombers would attack from low altitude, drawing Japanese fighters down. If the dive bombers arrived simultaneously from high altitude, they might strike unopposed.
At 8:20, Wade McCleskey reached the calculated interception point where Japanese carriers should be. Empty ocean. No ships visible in any direction. McCleskey's fuel gauge showed enough for perhaps 30 minutes of searching before he'd have to choose between ditching at sea or attempting the 175-mile return to Enterprise, a distance his remaining fuel couldn't cover. Japanese reconnaissance had spotted American carriers and radioed their position to Nagumo at 8:20. If Nagumo launched immediately, Japanese strike aircraft might be arriving over Enterprise at this exact moment, while Enterprise's own strike was lost over empty ocean, searching for targets that weren't where they should be. Every minute McCleskey searched, burning fuel he couldn't replace, was a minute his carrier remained vulnerable to attack. Behind him, 33 dive bombers followed in formation, their pilots watching fuel gauges tick down toward minimum reserves. Some were already calculating whether they had enough fuel to return to Enterprise. The answer? Probably not. McCleskey made his decision. Turn north, full search pattern. He was gambling that Japanese carriers had maneuvered after launching their Midway strike, probably turning north toward their anticipated position when American carriers were reported. If he guessed wrong, 33 dive bombers would ditch at sea, their crews likely lost, and Enterprise's striking power would be eliminated just as Japanese aircraft arrived to attack her. If he guessed correctly, he would find the Japanese carriers with his dive bombers perfectly positioned and, critically, unopposed, because Japanese fighters would be at low altitude dealing with American torpedo bombers. At 9:55, McCleskey spotted a Japanese destroyer racing northeast, throwing an enormous wake. Ships only moved that fast when heading toward combat. "Follow that destroyer," McCleskey radioed. "He'll lead us to their carriers." The destroyer was racing to recover a Japanese patrol aircraft, but McCleskey didn't know that. He only knew that a ship moving at maximum speed was probably moving towards something important. At 10:20, McCleskey's gunner shouted over the intercom, "Carriers! 4 carriers! Dead ahead!" Through the broken clouds, 15,000 feet below, McCleskey could see the entire Japanese mobile force, 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, accompanied by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. The carriers were turning into the wind. Their decks were packed with aircraft being serviced and rearmed. They were, McCleskey realized, about to launch a strike against the American carriers. In perhaps 10 minutes, the Japanese flight decks would be clear, aircraft launched, and the carriers would be virtually empty, poor targets. But right now, at this exact moment, every Japanese carrier had its deck packed with fueled and armed aircraft. One bomb penetrating the hangar deck would trigger catastrophic explosions. But McCluskey also saw Japanese fighters swarming like angry wasps, mauling American torpedo bombers attacking from low altitude. The torpedo attack was being slaughtered. McCluskey could see TBD devastators burning and falling into the ocean, but it was working. Every Japanese fighter was at sea level, decimating the torpedo bombers. The sky at 15,000 feet was empty, completely unopposed. Attacking, McCluskey radioed. No formal speech, no dramatic announcement, just 2 words launching what would become the most decisive 5 minutes in the Pacific War.
10:22 a.m., June 4, 1942. 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise in Yorktown split into 3 groups. McCluskey divided his Enterprise bombers. 17 aircraft would attack carrier Kaga. The remaining 16 would attack Akagi. Yorktown's bombers, arriving coincidentally at the same moment after their own navigational odyssey, would attack carrier Soryu. No Japanese fighter intercepted them. The entire Japanese Combat Air Patrol, 48 Zeros, was at sea level, having just annihilated Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet. All 15 aircraft shot down, only 1 pilot survived, and now mauling Enterprise's and Yorktown's torpedo squadrons. The Japanese carriers were helpless. Lieutenant Commander John W. Thatch, circling above in a Wildcat fighter, providing escort, and later developing the famous Thatch Weave defensive tactic, would write in his after-action report, "The Japanese carriers were so densely packed with aircraft that it looked like you could walk across their decks without touching wood. Aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip, fuel lines stretched across the decks, ordnance carts positioned between aircraft. One bomb anywhere on those decks would create a holocaust." McCluskey pushed over into his dive at 10:22:30. The SBD Dauntless was not a beautiful aircraft. It was angular, awkward, slow. But it was probably the best dive bomber in the world, capable of vertical dives approaching 280 miles per hour with exceptional stability and accuracy. McCluskey dove through 10,000 feet, his airspeed building rapidly. At 8,000 feet, he was vertical, his dive brakes extended, his bomb sight aligned on Akagi's flight deck. Anti-aircraft fire began reaching toward him. Too little, too late. Japanese anti-aircraft gunnery was oriented for high-altitude horizontal bombing or low-altitude torpedo attack. Nobody had trained them for steep diving attacks from directly overhead. At 2,500 feet, McCluskey released his 1,000-pound bomb and pulled out, his vision graying at the edges as G-forces crushed him into his seat. His bomb missed Akagi's deck by approximately 30 feet, exploding in the water. Behind him, 16 more SBD Dauntlesses from Enterprise dove on Akagi in rapid succession, each bomber dropping its 1,000-pound bomb, each pilot trying to center his bomb sight on the massive red circle painted on Akagi's deck. Most missed. Dive bombing, even with the excellent SBD, was difficult. The target was moving. Wind pushed aircraft and bombs off course. G-forces and adrenaline affected aim. Anti-aircraft fire, though poorly directed, created explosions that buffeted diving aircraft. But percentage hits didn't matter. Volume mattered. 17 dive bombers attacking a single carrier meant even 20% accuracy would put 3 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs through Akagi's deck. At 10:23:15, 45 seconds after the first bomb fell, Lieutenant Richard Best's 1,000-pound bomb struck Akagi near her midship elevator.
The bomb penetrated the wooden flight deck, penetrated the armored hangar deck below, and detonated in the upper hangar among aircraft being rearmed. What happened next was inevitable physics. The bomb blast ruptured fuel lines servicing 9 aircraft parked in the hangar. Aviation gasoline sprayed across the steel deck and ignited. The fire reached torpedoes armed with contact fuses, stored without proper safety protocols in the rush to launch strikes. The torpedoes detonated. Those explosions threw flaming aircraft and debris into adjacent aircraft, rupturing more fuel lines, detonating more munitions. Within 2 minutes, Akagi's entire upper hangar was a furnace burning at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Simultaneously, 17 more SBE Dauntlesses from Enterprise were diving on Kaga, 1,500 yards from Akagi. At 10:24, 3 bombs struck Kaga in rapid succession. One exploded on the flight deck near the forward elevator, throwing the 20-ton elevator platform into the ocean. The second penetrated near the aft elevator and detonated among aircraft armed for strike operations. Again, catastrophic secondary explosions. The third bomb struck near Kaga's island superstructure, killing most of the bridge staff, including the air operations officer. Yorktown's dive bombers, arriving coincidentally at almost the exact same moment after navigating independently, attacked carrier Soryu. 3 1,000-pound bombs struck Soryu's flight deck within 90 seconds. Secondary explosions began almost immediately. By 10:25 a.m., 3 minutes after the first American bomb fell, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers were burning uncontrollably. Akagi would burn for 12 hours before her captain ordered abandonment and her escorting destroyers scuttled her with torpedoes. Kaga burned for 7 hours before exploding and sinking. Soryu lasted 3 hours before her magazines detonated, breaking her in half. Fourth carrier, Hiryu, operating slightly separated from the other 3, escaped the initial attack, but her respite would last only hours.
Admiral Nagumo, watching Akagi transform from the pride of the Imperial Navy into a floating crematorium, transferred his flag to cruiser Nagara and ordered Hiryu to launch immediate strikes against the American carriers. Hiryu's air group, 40 aircraft, was Japan's last operational striking force. At 10:40, 18 Valdive bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, launched toward the last reported position of American carriers, approximately 110 miles distant. Enterprise and the other American carriers knew retaliation was coming. Radar detected the incoming Japanese strike at 62 miles. Fighters were vectored for interception. Anti-aircraft guns trained toward the threat bearing. At 1200, Japanese dive bombers found USS Yorktown and attacked. Yorktown's fighter cover shot down 10 of 18 attacking bombers, but the remaining 8 scored 3 bomb hits. Yorktown's damage control parties performed near miracles. Fires extinguished, flooding controlled, list corrected, flight operations resumed within 2 hours. But Hiryu launched a second strike, 10 torpedo bombers with 6 escorting fighters. This strike found Yorktown at 1440 and put 2 torpedoes into her port side. The resulting flooding couldn't be controlled. Yorktown's crew abandoned ship at 1700. She would remain afloat until June 7th, when a Japanese submarine finally sank her. Hiryu had damaged 1 American carrier severely enough to force abandonment. But Enterprise and Hornet remained operational, fully fueled, fully armed, and searching for the remaining Japanese carrier.
At 1500, Enterprise launched 24 dive bombers, every aircraft she could put in the air. Wade McCluskey, though wounded by shrapnel during the morning attack, led them. They found Hiryu at 1700, steaming northwest at 30 knots, her deck preparing to launch a third strike. 24 SBD Dauntlesses dove from 14,000 feet. 4 bombs hit Hiryu directly. 2 more exploded close alongside. Hiryu's hangar deck,
packed with aircraft being armed for launch erupted in flames identical to those consuming her sister carriers. By 1715, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor, terrorized the Indian Ocean, and dominated the Pacific for 6 months were burning or sunk. Enterprise had not been hit once.
On Enterprise's bridge, Admiral Spruance faced the most critical decision of the battle. His carriers had destroyed Japan's striking force, but the Japanese fleet remained. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and potentially light carriers with Admiral Yamamoto's main body fleet, believed to be several hundred miles northwest. Standard doctrine suggested pursuing aggressively, engaging the remaining Japanese forces while they were disorganized and demoralized. Several of Spruance's officers advocated exactly this. Spruance refused. His reasoning, recorded in his night orders discovered in Naval War College archives: "Our carriers have accomplished mission, enemy carriers destroyed. Our advantage is daytime air supremacy. Enemy advantage is night surface action with superior battleships. We will not risk our carriers in night engagement where enemy advantage is maximum. We will withdraw east until dawn, then resume operations if enemy forces remain in contact." This decision probably saved Enterprise and Hornet. Admiral Yamamoto, commanding the Japanese main body fleet with battleships Yamato and Nagato, plus numerous cruisers and destroyers, had planned exactly the night surface engagement Spruance avoided. Japanese night fighting doctrine emphasized torpedo attacks by destroyer squadrons, followed by battleship gunnery. American carriers caught at night by Japanese battleships would have been devastated. But when dawn broke on June 5th, Yamamoto recognized that without air cover from his now-destroyed carriers, his battleships were helpless against American carrier aircraft. He ordered withdrawal to Japan. The Battle of Midway was over. Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers and 248 aircraft. Approximately 3,057 Japanese naval personnel died, including many of Japan's most experienced carrier pilots and maintenance crews. America lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, and 150 aircraft. Approximately 307 American personnel died. Enterprise had launched 141 combat sorties over 2 days, recovered aircraft from 3 different carriers, including her own, Hornets, and Yorktown's after Yorktown was damaged, survived without a scratch, and sunk or helped sink all 4 Japanese fleet carriers. But her war was just beginning.
In the aftermath of Midway, Enterprise returned to Pearl Harbor on June 13, 1942, for replenishment and minor repairs. Her crew learned the cost of their victory. Torpedo Squadron 6, which had launched 14 TBD Devastators from Enterprise on the morning of June 4th, returned with 5 aircraft. 10 were shot down by Japanese fighters or anti-aircraft fire. 32 aircrew, pilots and gunners, were killed. Bombing Squadron 6 fared better. Of 33 SBD Dauntlesses launched, 30 returned to Enterprise. 2 were forced to ditch when they ran out of fuel. 1 was shot down by Japanese fighters. 7 aircrew died. Fighting Squadron 6 lost 3 F-4F Wildcats, with 2 pilots killed. Across the task force, the toll was staggering. Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8 was annihilated. All 15 aircraft shot down, leaving a single survivor, Ensign George Gay, clinging to debris in the Pacific for hours. McCluskey's judgment to allow torpedo squadrons to draw Japanese fighters to low altitude had succeeded tactically, but it came at the cost of nearly the entire torpedo arm of the Hornet. Their sacrifice, however, was instrumental. It cleared the skies for the dive bombers to strike unopposed. Enterprise herself had emerged almost miraculously unscathed. Not a single bomb, torpedo, or shell had found its mark. Her radar had detected the incoming Hiryu strike early. Her CAP, Combat Air Patrol, had intercepted attacking aircraft, and her damage control teams had remained on constant alert. But ultimately, she had been spared. In this moment, the crew realized the truth. USS Enterprise was not merely a ship. She was a shield for America's naval power, a flying fortress at sea, capable of turning the tide of battle through sheer resilience and disciplined execution.
Midway was more than a battle. It was the proof of a doctrine and an industrial philosophy. Where Japanese planners relied on elite pilot skill and concentrated early strikes, the Americans leveraged redundancy, doctrine, and industrial capacity. Every sunk Japanese carrier underscored the limits of Japan's design philosophy, speed and striking power at the cost of survivability. Every surviving American aircraft carrier illustrated the advantages of modular repair, distributed command, and robust design. The numbers told the story. 4 Japanese carriers with 248 aircraft annihilated by 3 American carriers with 233 aircraft. The Japanese had technological superiority in some aircraft, better individual pilot experience, and numerical advantage. Yet, America won because she had systems thinking, radar, damage control, coordinated intelligence, and an operational philosophy that transformed numerical inferiority into strategic dominance. Enterprise's performance was not luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity. Her repeated phantom sinkings had misled Japanese intelligence repeatedly, but her very survival became a symbol of the industrial and organizational advantages the United States could project across the Pacific. She would fight in every major naval engagement afterward, each time absorbing damage, returning to the fight, proving the validity of American design philosophy.